I bought a house for $50,000 with the old man's money. Full accession. As Vivian proudly flaunted a bank book in front of me, boasting about her purchase, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Even though I've been trying to keep my cool and not be surprised by anything lately, I just couldn't contain my laughter at this moment. Hey, what's up with you? Why are you laughing so hard? I think the eldest son's wife wanted to leave me speechless, but I didn't say anything like that. Instead, I was laughing uproariously right in front of her. After laughing for a while and being unable to speak, I finally composed myself and said to her, "Sorry for you." She didn't seem to understand at all, so I subtly pointed at the bank book in her hand. "My name is Rita. Ever since I married my husband, who is 10 years older than me, I believe I've been the subject of gossip. After all, my husband, who is 10 years older, was a wealthy man already owning several companies and having a lot of money at that time. Anyone marrying a man like him, especially one 10 years younger, would be thought to be after his money. However, I never once coveted my husband's wealth. In truth, my husband used to live in poverty. His father had disappeared due to gambling, leaving him and his mother alone in a small apartment. I was the daughter of the landlord of that apartment. There were no other children my age around, so my future husband, who's 10 years older, would always play with me. As I always played with him, I found myself attracted to him, not boys my age. I still remember how, as a child, I confessed my feelings to him for the first time and was rejected with a laugh saying, "When you're older." Patient in middle school, when I confessed again, I received the same response, "When you're older," which frustrated me. We continued to correspond even after he moved to New York, and I confessed every time he returned home. Even in high school, when I confessed, he said, "You're still too young," which surprised him as he hadn't expected a high school student to keep confessing. Finally, when I graduated from high school and started university, he responded to my confession, saying, "Once you're in university, you'll meet many people and broaden your perspectives. If you still like me then, I'll respond to your confession." Of course, my feelings, which have been steadfast since elementary school, didn't change during my 4 years of university. When I graduated and confessed again, he bashfully said, "You're the only one who's loved me this much," and we officially started dating. I was 23, having graduated from university and started working, while he was already 33. He had moved to New York and was getting attention for his successful business ventures. I was ready to marry him anytime, so when he said, "I want to marry you after I make this company successful," I believed him and decided to wait. He and I were living together at the time, so when I got home, I would finish all the household chores and prepare his favorite food, waiting for him. Honestly, there were times I wondered if he really liked me, but when I asked him directly, he said, "To be honest, when we were in elementary and middle school, I thought it was just a childish crush that would fade away quickly." But I never expected to be confessed to in high school and even in college. Then I realized, how she really likes me, and I started to feel shy and aware of my feelings. In fact, I was worried during your college years that you might find someone else. When I asked if he had dated anyone before me, he said he hadn't had time for romance because he was busy studying and working hard to rise from his poor background. We both were confident that we would never betray each other, so we always got along well. Even when we heard about several couples around us getting divorced, the word divorce seemed irrelevant to us. Well, my husband had built an asset of $12 million, so many people who only knew about our 10-year age gap thought she must have married him for his money, or she was after the insurance money when he dies. Some people understood that we had known each other since I was a baby and didn't think that way, but others stubbornly refused to believe. Those people usually think my husband never experienced poverty and assume that wealthy people have always been privileged from birth. When my husband took me to parties, I often heard people gossiping about us, and each time I would tell my frowning husband, just smile, pretending not to be affected. But in truth, I really wasn't affected. After all, no matter what others say, our love doesn't change. My husband trusted me completely, so he believed in me no matter what others said. Then, a few years after we got married, we had our eldest son, Peter. The following year, we had our second son, Dan, and we became a family of 4. Both of our sons grew up freely and happily. Even though we were financially comfortable, the world is always changing. You never know when you might run out of money, so my husband and I didn't tell Peter and Dan about our wealth and taught them the value of money. In elementary school, they would get 10 cents for helping with household chores. Their monthly allowance was set at $1. and both had their own piggy banks and household account books to learn how to manage money. They were thrilled to receive their own unique piggy banks. The next day, they started putting their allowance in piggy banks and recording the amounts in their account book. Perhaps their upbringing was effective. By the time they were in high school, instead of asking for pocket money, they said they wanted to work to buy what they wanted. Peter started working at a cafe and Dan at a bookstore. In their own ways, they respected each other's interests, and they always looked forward to their future. My husband felt the same and said, "I'm excited to see what kind of women they'll end up with." But to which I replied, "Well, these days, it could be someone of the same gender, or they might choose to stay single for life." He laughed, "That's true. Anyway, as long as they're happy, that's what matters." With that, my husband and I laughed together. Yes, we just wanted our two sons to be happy, no matter what future they chose. But we never imagined our eldest son would want to marry someone who would make us exclaim, "You're marrying her." I want to introduce a woman to you, Dad, Mom, and Dan. I've been dating her, and I'm thinking of marrying her in the future. Even after Peter and Dan graduated from university, started working, and moved out of the family home, we made sure to have a family dinner once a month. During one of these dinners, when Peter announced his decision, Rita, my husband and Dan were already in a celebratory mood, excitedly saying, "We can't wait to meet her." Then Peter brought the woman in question to our house. Wow, what a fantastic house. Is this what a wealthy family's home looks like? Someday I'll be living in this house too. How wonderful. While saying this, she gazed around her home in awe. Peter watched her with a fond smile. When we greeted the two of them, she said, "My name is Vivian. I work as a model, though I use a stage name. Do you know me?" Looking at me expectantly. I do look at magazines occasionally, but I've never paid much attention to who the models are. So replied, "No," and she nodded in understanding. "I guess you might be younger than my father-in-law, but you're still quite old, so you probably don't read the kind of magazines I appear in." Excuse me? I was taken aback. Was I just insulted? No, that couldn't be. Coming to introduce herself for marriage, yet mocking me, her future mother-in-law at our first meeting. It's unimaginable that someone would do such a thing. Moreover, it's true that I don't often read magazines featuring models around her age, so her comment was probably on point. She likely didn't mean any harm. Oh, by the way, were you and my father-in-law in an arranged marriage or something? No, but why do you ask? Because Peter and I are in a love marriage. You, my father-in-law, married despite the 10-year age gap, right? It must have been an unwanted marriage for one of you, but how did you manage to stay together for so long? I'm curious. Actually, if we count the years I've had a crush on him, it's a lot longer than the time Vivian has liked Peter. But comparing the length of our romances is pointless. We had a love marriage. Just like you two. Really? No way. Are you sure you're not just pretending for the money? She brought up the topic of money, just like those who accused me of marrying my husband for his wealth. Hearing this, Peter finally said, "My parents really had a love marriage. You can tell by the way they are together." Vivian stopped asking me more questions with a puzzled expression. When Peter took Vivian home, both my husband and Dan were shocked. They were appalled by her remarks and were too stunned to say anything. Is my brother really going to marry that kind of woman? Why? He's a high earner. There must be plenty of other nice women out there. Dan was holding his head, worried about his brother. I patted his shoulder and reassured him. It's okay. Peter was just covering for her, wasn't he? He wasn't joining in or overlooking her remarks. He must have a plan to handle her behavior. If they get married, he must really love her to choose her over all the other nice women out there, despite their complex expressions. My husband and Dan seemed to agree with my words. Therefore, our family decided to celebrate the marriage of Peter and Vivian. Soon after the marriage was decided, Vivian demanded, "Since you're the groom's family, you should give a gift of $10,000 per person." However, Peter silenced her by saying, "The standard amount is fine. If we receive that much, it'll look like I'm not earning anything." He's calmed down and agitated Vivian. Back to me, I thought that as long as Peter keeps a firm hand on her, they could build a good home. My husband, Dan, and I decided not to worry about their household. Time passed, and my husband passed away. Although he succumbed to illness and aging, by that time, people who had once thought I married him for his wealth had come to see me as a devoted wife. Those who had the chance to talk to my husband knew he had cleared up any misunderstandings about me, so at the funeral, no one looked at me suspiciously. However, one person's eyes were shining with excitement. That person was Vivian. Vivian was Peter's wife. She didn't say anything at the funeral, but soon after, she came to our house. Flaunting a bank book in front of me, she said, "I've always been stopped by Peter, but this time, he agreed with my plan, so it's the end for you now." People, I had no idea what she meant by the end with that bank book. I bought a house for $500,000 with the old man's money. Having Vivian show off the bank book with pride, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, realizing the huge mistake she had made based on her words in the bank book in her hand. Even though I had been trying to keep calm and not be surprised by anything since my husband's death, I couldn't contain my laughter this time. "Hey, what's going on? What are you laughing so much?" I think Vivian wanted to hear me say something defeated, but I didn't. Instead, I was laughing right in front of her. After a while, I finally managed to stop laughing and said to her, I'm sorry for you." She didn't seem to understand, so I subtly pointed at the bank book in her hand. "Look at the name carefully." Huh. Wait, this is Peter's bank book." Seeing her reaction, I burst into laughter again. I had no intention of mocking her, but recalling how she boasted with Peter's bank book, claiming she spent my husband's money, I couldn't help but laugh. Haha, the first character of Peter's name and my husband Paul's name are the same, right? So, I got it mixed up. Hey, wait, don't laugh at me. I seriously thought it was my father-in-law's bank book. But my realty even took his ID. I borrowed it after the funeral. Somewhere. Like from a black bag. Everyone carries a black bag to a funeral. Oh, a true packing. I laughed, holding my stomach. And, as it turned out, the bag from which she took the bank book belonged to her own husband. But I bought a house for $500,000 with it. Do you have $500,000 to borrow a house? Would you pass the mortgage screening? Well, Peter was with me, so I had him do it. I found the situation increasingly hilarious. Vivian found the bank book in her husband Peter's bag, and then she must have suggested buying the house with the account holder, Peter. Seeing the amount in the bank book, she must have proposed buying a house for $500,000. Since Peter and Vivian were living in an apartment, Peter might have thought, maybe it's time to buy a house. In any case, for Peter it was simply buying a house with his own money. Buying a house with his own earned money. But Vivian mistook it for my husband's bank book and thought she could use it, not being the account holder. I thought it was the bank book with your husband's insurance money in it. The beneficiary of my husband's insurance is me, so if the money was transferred, it would be into my account. Besides, you can't normally use an account of someone who's passed away, right? Vivian's face turned red at my words. Then, Peter and Vivian's parents appeared at our house. I thought you'd be here. Peter approached Vivian nonchalantly. Vivian's parents, looking pale, came to me and said, "We're so sorry for our daughter's rudeness," bowing repeatedly. As I was surprised, Vivian's parents explained what had happened. After Peter and Vivian decided to buy a house and completed the contract, an excited Vivian texted her mother, "Got a mansion with the dead father-in-law's insurance money. I'll invite you over once we move in." Now, I'm going to brag to the money-hungry mother-in-law about buying a house with the money she was supposed to get. Her mother panicked, showed the message to her father, and they both contacted Peter in a hurry. Peter calmed them down, saying, "I see," and brought them to our house. I always kept an eye on Vivian, expecting her to mess up sometimes, but I never thought she'd mix up my bank book with Dad's. I didn't think she'd make such a blunder. Peter laughed as much as I did when he realized Vivian's mistake. Vivian's parents told her to apologize, their faces still pale, but Peter and I continued to laugh, creating a chaotic scene. Once Peter and I stopped laughing, Vivian's parents apologized and said, "We're truly sorry for what our daughter did." Seeing your parents, a flustered Vivian also apologized to us. "Oh, it's all right. In the end, I haven't suffered any harm." I told Vivian and her parents not to apologize, but they insisted. "No, we know you two had a love marriage and were together before your husband built his fortune. I saw your husband on a TV program talking about how you two met. My wife and I were so moved by your love story." "Wait, I don't know anything about that." As I exclaimed in surprise, Peter, sitting next to me, said, I thought Mom didn't know. Dad couldn't stand seeing Mom misunderstood, so he talked about it everywhere, and it reached the ears of a TV station. They thought it was a great story and broadcasted how Mom and Dad met. Was that what you asking about a few years ago when he wanted to tell people our story? I guess you did give the okay. I thought it was just for casual conversation. As my face turned as red as Vivian's, who was still embarrassed by her blunder, I realized the legacy my husband had left behind. Our daughter has caused such a disgrace. If Peter wants to divorce her after this, Peter, looking puzzled, replied, "What? I've no intention of divorcing her. Even after what she did." Like Mom said, there was no harm done, and I would have stopped her if it looked like there would be. I married her, including her occasional blunders, because I love her. I'll take responsibility for her actions, so please don't worry. Peter said this with a refreshing smile. Vivian moved, hugged him, and her parents were in awe of him, praising Peter for his kindness. When Dan, the younger son, heard about it later, he said, "I just can't understand my brother's thinking," looking skyward. When I asked Peter why he loved her so much, he said, laughing, "She's never boring to watch." It's a queer soul history. Remembering how he made me laugh during my grief after my husband's death, I felt I understood what he meant. Being with her probably meant no time for minor worries or sulking. Though Vivian did what she did, she's been without an allowance for a while, and recently started working at my favorite cafe. Whether she was embarrassed by how much I laughed at her, scolded by her parents, or heard in detail about mine and my husband's love story from them, I'm not. But lately, she's been calling me Mom and treating me more respectfully. For a while, I think I'll continue visiting this cafe, watching Peter's wife grow and change.